You could see it as funny, if you have a dark and possibly insidious sense of humor. All I was trying to do was support a small business. I'd been reading about the decline of mom and pop shops and the looming corporations looking for a small window to usurp the market. So when I saw a sign for a farm stand a few back roads off my typical path, I went straight away. The lanes meandered, transforming from asphalt to gravel to dusty dirt, and as promised, I finally pulled up to a lead-white farmhouse with a brick-colored barn a few hundred yards away. The edges of the fields and orchards lined the way, with beautiful scarecrows stuffed with leaves decorating the perimeter. In front, in the dirt driveway, stood a well-worn wooden booth manned by an old woman with a long gray braid down her back. I smiled as I approached, a little flutter in my belly as I thought about talking to someone who wasn't a furious customer on the other end of a phone line. "Hi there," I called. The woman turned around with a soft smile on her lips, a soft crinkling of crow's feet perched at her eye. "Well now, you're a new face," she said, beaming. "Yeah, I saw your sign off the road and I just had to come. It's such a lovely place." Well, aren't you just as sweet as autumn syrup?" she remarked. A sharp look to her eyes threatened to creep in. But just as I noted it, it vanished. Brushing off my moment of discomfort, I asked, "Autumn syrup? Is that the same as maple syrup?" She smiled, just like I asked her $1 million question. "A maple syrup pales in comparison, honey. Autumn syrup is pure magic. The smell, the taste. If you love the season, you simply must have it." She beckoned me to follow her a few dozen feet to the farm stand and slip behind it to reach below in what I assumed were shelves built into the booth. A smooth glass bottle, maybe the size of a nip or two, was in her hand. Halleck Farms Autumn Syrup. The label was refined in a rustic way, soft script declaring its name. The woman leaned in closer to me when she handed the bottle off. "I'm Mary, by the way." Taking the bottle and shaking her hand, I introduced myself as well. "Birdie? That's a lovely name. Haven't heard it in decades much now, have we? Birdie, I think you're a special one. Tell you what, you take this autumn syrup home, free of charge. I think you'll enjoy it so much that it'll be payment enough in its own right. You find yourself needing more, you know where to find me." The kindness of this woman made my heart ache. "Oh, Mary, please, don't be silly. I'm happy to pay for the..." "Now, Birdie, you heard me. You take this autumn syrup, you enjoy it. That's all I want. Now go along, and I'll see you when it's time." She dismissed me, and with a slight dampening to my spirits after, I headed back to my car. I still had an extra skip in my step, though. I loved fall, and I couldn't wait to try this syrup. I removed the lid in the car to take a whiff, and was overwhelmed by impossible aromas of autumn. Crunchy leaves on a forest trail, apple cider mulling on the stovetop, pumpkin guts, cinnamon. The whole drive home, I thought about what recipe I'd like to make first to try this intoxicating syrup. An hour later, I was on my couch with a plate of apple cinnamon pancakes and a bottle of autumn syrup on the tabletop. Settling into my regular nook, I cut up my dinner and dipped a bite of pancake in a small pool of the syrup. Saying it was amazing was comically underselling it. Ambrosia, the nectar of the gods, came closer, but to this day, I can't give an adequate description of what autumn syrup tasted like. It reminded me of how Amortenia took on the favorite scent of the smeller to appeal to them perfectly. It was as if the syrup tasted every flavor I most loved. I finished my pancakes in short order. I was sated and elated, simply humming with joy at the delight of my autumnal feast. I felt good, great even. For a while, still on the sofa, a prickling feeling in my fingers announced itself maybe an hour after my dinner. Instinctively, I brought my thumb to my mouth to suck on any remaining autumn syrup. but the sensation only worsened, and now my mouth was tingling too. I took a Benadryl to assuage any possible mild allergic response I might have been experiencing. I was soon hit with the most common side effect of diphenhydramine, drowsiness. I crawled into bed, weary and sweet, until morning. Today I topped my breakfast of oatmeal with the other half of the autumn syrup. The dram only held a few teaspoons of the stuff, it seemed. Just as before, my mouth lit up with the taste of the season, unfolding into thousands of flavors that I loved. Smoked vanilla, warm nutmeg, a sunny apple orchard, cold, rainy afternoons in October. My whole body tingled from the perfection of this syrup. Thistle, corn mazes, decadent autumn leaves. Rubbing at my mouth, I decided to work from home today. At noon, I took a stroll down the quieter roads in my neighborhood, leisurely pausing to take photos of lush, fiery foliage. My boots crunched along the lanes that slowly turned from asphalt to dirt and gravel. Eyes in the sky, scanning the canopy for delicious candy red leaves. I didn't notice the divot in my path before I landed on my face. A small pile of leaves softened the blow. I would have felt grateful had I not felt such a strange twinge in me. Physically, I was fine, not even a twisted ankle. But with my nose in the leaves, I felt a hunger I never experienced. The pile of leaves smelled like autumn syrup, promising a sweetness in its richness, a true bite of autumn. I don't know why I did it, but that leaf, red with pinkened edges and a streak of yellow, was soon inside my mouth. It was crisp and easily softened, bringing to mind the taste of apple crisp and foggy mornings. I ate 3 leaves before I got a grasp on myself and pulled myself to my feet to head home. I ate bland foods for the rest of the night, almost in penance. I was out of autumn syrup and found myself wondering if that wasn't for the best. I was woken in the middle of the night by a tight twist in my stomach that brought me hurrying to the bathroom. I felt my body heave several times, hearing my sick splash into the toilet water. Stupid, I said to myself, eyes bleary from vomiting. Why would I do that? Of course leaves will make you sick, you're not a cow. Briefly, I considered if it would be better to scoop the leaves out of the bowl to go gentler into the plumbing. On the plumbing, or if flushing them would be okay. When I wiped my eyes, I was shocked to only see my plain bread, banana, and applesauce sitting in the bowl. Had the leaves somehow not been why I was sick? My head felt dizzy after being ill, and since it was still the wee hours, I went back to sleep. Getting ready for work, I ran for the bathroom again as I smelled my fresh coffee brewing. I cracked an egg and was brought to my knees. I sighed. I had no sick days and had to get into work no matter what. Looks like we're skipping breakfast today. As I walked over to my Corolla, I passed over fallen leaves. With each step, their luscious scent wafted to my nose, and I closed my eyes to soak it in. When I opened them again, I was kneeling on my driveway, scooping a small armful of leaves to the crook of my elbow. I was doing this again? I brought my haul into the car and heaped them onto my passenger seat. I sat down quickly and shut myself in my car and ate a few more leaves as I drove to work. I couldn't focus all day. I made about 3 phone calls before I took my first trip back to my little green car, sneaking greedy mouthfuls of leaf. From my car, I called my doctor. I may have been chagrined, but I knew something was wrong. I Googled around, found myself reading about pica. Leaves weren't common, but really any non-food item can become a craving. I went home 2 hours early after having taken so many breaks. I tried making dinner again, but found myself nauseated at the thought of the contents of my cabinet. Returning from the obligatory tour of my bathroom, I slumped into the couch for some reflection. Did you know that the brown leaves are actually pretty tasty? Full of oak and rum and ginger notes? No, I can't think of that. I need to think of what happened to me. I was fine before I got that strange skin and oral irritation. What had caused it anyway? I froze. I needed to talk to Mary at Hollock Farms. The stand was still open when my Corolla rolled up to the little farm. I saw her long silver braid and crinkled eyes trained on my arrival. Mary wore a private smile, hawking those bottles of autumn syrup. I noticed that the small dram was the only size available. The only size needed, I thought. I walked quickly across the pebbled parking lot to where Mary stood. "Oh, Bertie," she cried. "So good to see you. Is it time already?" I ignored her and tersely asked, "What have you done to me?" A wry grin wrapped itself around her face for a moment. "Eating leaves, are we?" She glanced at my hand, and I saw for the first time I was holding a fistful of leaves. I threw them to the ground in disgust. "Bertie, isn't autumn simply the most perfect time of year? The sweet smell of decay and decadence, rich and smooth like syrup. Are you going to tell me it wasn't worth it, Bertie? You tasted heaven." She cupped my chin and tapped on my lip. My mouth began to tingle, like it was full of bees and static. I couldn't reply. I was, in fact, speechless, at a loss of how I was experiencing something divine and so horrid. But also my knees were buckling and my lips and throat were burning. "You wouldn't change a thing now, would you, Bertie? That's how the magic works. The syrup doesn't work alone," Mary cooed. The fire was spreading in my body. I must have ingested some of it because my wrists and ankles were itching like they were infested by bugs. I began to scratch, tearing my skin a raw pink until something began to jut through it. "The spell goes back several generations in my family. We need protection to grow these crops, the herbs and the corn and the like. We need protection for our magic." Mary circled me. I could hardly move. On my back and alone in front of her farmstead, I felt stuffed, bloated with every drop of autumn syrup I swallowed, every leaf I put down. Through my wrists, I noticed straw and leaves gushing out. My breath went ragged. I heard a susurrus with each heave of my chest. "You understand it, though. It's why you are so susceptible to the autumn syrup. I know you understand the cycle of life and death and how necessary sacrifice is in between. You are a willing sacrifice to the autumn, Bertie. The spell is impossible without your will." I shuffled angrily away, my jeans crinkling with straw and leaves. "You're crazy, Mary," I sputtered. "You're wrong," heaving myself into my car. I bent over with my legs still out of the car, bringing up more foliage. The wisps of air passing in and out of my turgid mouth were what could now be considered my breaths. Mary's figure faded in the distance, making no move to follow me as I peeled away. She said I'd see her when it was time, and I think I'm fast approaching time. Driving past the scarecrows that lined the Hollock farm, I saw that Mary had moved closer to something. A singular, unmanned post. This is kombucha. It's a drink you make by adding a culture of bacteria called SCOBY to yeast, sugar, and tea. The health benefits of the drink are out of this world, man. Along with providing vital vitamins and nutrients, support for the immune system, and organ health, the bacteria can completely rework your gut's microbiome. It's a trippy miracle drink. For an old hippie, that man sure knew his stuff. Usually I don't come to places like the farmer's market, but after my heart scare, Doc said I had to start making some changes. That's wild, man. Hook me up with a few. I figured even if it was snake oil, what have I got to lose? The man leaned in close and popped open a fresh bottle. If you want, I can give you some SCOBY. You can make this wonder drink from the comfort of your own home. He had the fizzing bottle out to me. Something about his expression was unsettling. His eyes were glazed over and there were red veins crawling from their edges. There were a few pieces of something green stuck in his teeth of his frozen, unmoving smile. He was probably just high. Really? Thanks. It doesn't sound like rocket science or anything, but why would you want to teach a man to fish when you could sell the fish for a profit? He looked at me and unscrewed the lid from a large glass container on his table. The water inside was murky and brown. He reached in and pinched a strange-looking, slimy mass that was floating on top. I thought I saw it move. It had to have been my imagination. The old hippie took a piece of SCOBY and put it into a bowl-sized glass jar full of yellow liquid. On the side of the glass was a sticker that read, "Wild and Free Farms." He handed me the jar. "It's not about what makes me a prophet," he said with that blank glaze. "It's about setting the wonders of this thing free." He continued to stare into my eyes and extended the jar to me. I reached for it, and he let out a short whimper through his teeth. A single tear rolled down his cheek. You all right?" His face snapped out of its frozen position, and his eyes moved down towards the table to the bottle he'd opened. Don't want to forget that guy." "Oh, yeah, thanks," I said. I took the open bottle and the jar with the strange, slimy mass and turned to leave. When I looked back over my shoulder, the man was still staring at me, waving slowly and smiling. It tasted pretty awful, but it's been my experience that most things that are good for you do. I chugged it and walked to my car. Maybe I could find a way to cook some of the organic vegetables I'd bought that day into something decent. Probably not. I'd heard of parsnips, but I'm pretty sure up until that day I'd never seen one. Thank God no one was around to see or smell the mess I was making. My stomach was kind of gurgling after the hippie drink, but hopefully this slop could mellow things out a bit. As I sat on my porch, eating the abomination I'd made, my mouth began to burn. Fresh cayenne peppers were much hotter than they had any business being. I ran inside and flung the fridge open. Milk, 2 jugs of sweet tea, and flat Diet Cola were my options. And then I remembered the hippie drink, the kombucha. The bottle of it had messed me up, but something about it was refreshing. Kind of like ginger. It burns, but it's a clean burn, and you get an odd sense of refreshment afterwards. I grabbed the jar from the kitchen table, unscrewed the lid, and took a swig. The slimy mass floating on top touched my lip. That should have grossed me out, but it didn't. I finished drinking the liquid, and now the SCOBY sat alone in the empty jar. Then, there was a strange ringing sound in my head. It felt like an alarm was going off. Small tendrils sprouted from the SCOBY, and it began to wiggle. I felt its pain. It was gasping to breathe. What was it the old hippie guy said? Sugar, yeast, and tea? I had some sweet tea in the fridge that ought to cover 2 bases, but I don't think I've bought or even seen yeast in my entire life. The ringing went off in my head again, and this time it hurt. It felt like a sharp knife slipping into the meat of my brain. When it stopped, I felt sick. My stomach was doing cartwheels. It seemed like everything around me began to wiggle. I was going to throw up. What emerged from the pit of my gut was now on the floor. It was a baseball-sized mass of wiggling tissue, and it, too, had tendrils similar to the SCOBYs on the table. The tendrils flipped and squirmed, and the thing flopped on the floor like a fish out of water. The ringing and the pain came again. I can't quite explain it. But they needed me. I rushed to the neighbor's house and pounded on the door. She was an older woman, retired and most likely home. After what felt like minutes, she cracked the screen door. "Oh, hello there, neighbor. Haven't seen you in a..." Yeast! The word just blurted out of me. I said it, but it didn't feel like I was saying it. "Yeast?" she replied. "Sorry, yeah, do you have any?" She thought for a moment. "I may have a packet or 2. Making some bread?" I honestly didn't know what it was for. "Yes, bread," I said, but again, they didn't feel like they were coming from my mouth. She squinted behind her glasses and looked at me for a moment. "I'll be right back." Moments passed, and she emerged with 2 small packets. "This should be more than enough for a few loaves of bread." My hand reached out quickly, and I plucked the packets from her. It was another decision I didn't make. She looked up at me, startled. "In a hurry, then? Supper isn't for some hours." My hand was still extended, holding the packets. The ringing blared in my head again, and I rushed back home. My neighbor yelled after me, "Good luck with the bread!" When I stepped into the kitchen, the table that the SCOBY was on was covered in pulsing veins. The blob I had coughed onto the floor made its way onto the table. Its tendrils were fusing with the tendrils of the SCOBY. They were becoming one. Without thinking, I went to the fridge and fetched the 2 jugs of sweet tea. Then, I walked to the bathroom off the kitchen, plugged the tub's drain, and poured them both in. I threw the empty jugs on the floor and looked up in the mirror. To my horror, there were thick, brown tendrils reaching downward from my nostrils. The whites of my eyes had become a tapestry of red, tangled veins. My smile, reflecting back at me, wasn't my smile. I couldn't move. I was stuck inside my own body. Something had taken complete control. Never in my life had I wanted to scream more, but I couldn't. Then, something in my mind soothed me, like the refreshing feeling of drinking the kombucha for the first time. My hands reached into my pocket and retrieved the packets of yeast. The thing inside of me sprinkled them into the tub. The festering mucus sac on my kitchen table made it to the threshold of the bathroom doorway. It was shooting vinous, vine-looking appendages from itself. They stuck to the walls and objects around it, and the mass used them to propel itself along. I bent and picked it up. As it writhed in my hands, the tendrils that were coming out of my nose extended towards it. When they met those of the mass, they twisted and fused together. More fell from my mouth, and all at once, the thing pulled more blobs from every hole in my face. Small ones from my nostrils, larger ones from my now gaping mouth. This should have hurt, but I felt nothing. I was terrified, but I was also sedated. The mass I was holding, along with the things it pulled from my face, fell into the bathtub. Something was calling me to get in as well. I'm not sure if it was me or the thing inside of me that made that decision. I was being wrapped in a cocoon of wiry tendrils. Chunks of SCOBY were rapidly forming all around me. The water was becoming spongy, like dense bread. It was very warm. The SCOBY continued to multiply until my bathtub was overflowing. Later that month, I was set up at my own Wild and Free Farms kombucha stand. I sent pinches of SCOBY home with happy customers. Kombucha became the drink of the summer that year. Stands continued to open up all across the state, and eventually, across the entire country. They were growing, wild and free. They didn't deserve that. They don't deserve that. I don't deserve this. No one does. The thing is, I was never close with my parents. I mean, I loved them and had no problems hanging out around each other. We were just never close, you know? There was always a distance that we never bothered to close. So when I moved away to uni, I didn't look back. There wasn't even much to look back to. My hometown wasn't even that. It was just a collection of small houses that had happened to be built at the intersection of 2 roads. I mean, sure, our town appeared on the map, but that's just because they had to put a name there. It was a nowhere place with nothing of worth. Except my family. University was hard. I mean, obviously it was hard academics-wise, but the change from living amongst the same 7 families my entire life to a city with hundreds of thousands gave me whiplash. But still, I thrived. I clawed my way up with everything I had to escape from where I had come from. Even though some of my peers doubted me and others whispered trailer trash behind my back, I proved them wrong. I was better than them. Not through some trust fund, but through my own hard work. I tried at every opportunity to forget my past, including leaving my parents behind. When summer break came around and I had no other plans, I decided that I would visit home. I don't know why I decided to go back. It's not like I had any reason to suspect anything was different. I hadn't even messaged my folks in the 8 months since my mom's birthday. I just found myself making the long drive back home in the midst of a summer heat wave with nothing but empty fields in every direction. Anyway, I eventually arrived just outside the boundaries separating my town from the endless farmland and had to slow my car to a halt. There was a concrete barrier blocking the entire road from being used. The only thing indicating that the road stopped so abruptly was a sign posted at the top of the barrier. Dead end. I had to drive into the ditch to get around the blockade, somehow getting my car stuck in the process. I swore to the sky and was reminded how much I hated this place. I should have taken that as a sign to leave, to think that maybe the barrier was there for a reason and that someone knew. Someone had to know. Still, I pressed forward, determined to not let this awful place get the better of me. The town was quiet, not a single sound other than the wind chimes and some faint noise carried by the wind. It had always been quiet, but somehow I knew it was different. There were definitely more trees in the front yards of my neighbors than I remembered. I also noticed that there was what seemed to be an empty ambulance parked in front of a house at the other end of the street, silently sitting with its doors open and its sirens off. When I let myself into my old house, the only sound that I could hear was the static from the old radio my dad used to listen to the news with. The faint aroma of lavender also filled my nostrils. It wasn't dark in the house, quite the opposite. It was bright. Every curtain was open and every light was turned on, showing how dusty the house had become. It also meant I could see everything. My father sat in his old reclining chair facing out to the backyard with his back to me. It was almost right out of a greeting card. If not for the shallow wheezing, I could hear from him. When I rushed over to make sure he was okay, I saw the front half of his body. It looked like his skin had melted in the chair, rooting him in place, unable to move. Thin tendrils made of flesh and muscle stretched out of his feet in front of him, covering the carpet in a slick, bloody flower bed. Every inch of the front half of my dad's body bloomed outward, stretching into the sunlight to dry and get as much nutrients as possible. His skin burst open from what looked like boils, unfolding into petals and pistils. Some sprouted out of his orifices, growing and growing and growing, grasping for the sun outside the window. I puked and I screamed. I thought my dad had died and I had not even known. I wish. When I looked at where his eyes had been, between the skin leaves and throbbing bulbs, I saw him looking at me, and I saw fear. Those eyes that I had tried to even forget the color of begged me for help, no matter what had to be done to stop the pain. I ripped at the flowers and roots, trying to get him free, but his flowering skin shuddered and he squelched out a small, muffled moan through a throat full of flowers. It had hurt him to simply be alive. I fumbled to find my phone in my pocket to dial 911, but it didn't seem to go through. All I heard was the dial tone and the faint sound of wind chimes on the other end of the line. I looked around the rest of the house to try and find something to help him. I tried the bleach under the kitchen counter, but that only seemed to please the flowers. Searching in the dining room, I saw a lighter next to my mother's birthday cake, now rotting with small blossoming flies sticking out of the fuzzy frosting. It wasn't long until I found what I assumed was my mother. She was outside in the back garden, grimly enough. She had grown into a sprawling tree, her bones splintering into branches that stretched into the sky, her bark scabbed over, dripping with sap and pus. She resembled a cherry tree with raw pink wounds budding into flowers. She was also alive, for however much I wish it weren't true. She managed to even stutter out telling me to kill her. No one could help. Every one of my neighbors' houses held the same thing. Now seeing the trees outside for what they really were, I rushed past every house I could, hoping and searching for anyone to help me or my parents. There were dozens of flower beds littering the lawns, with flowering arms reaching out in the sky asking for help and sunlight. One of the most disturbing sights was the playset that the Evans had owned, now wrapped in vines. One of my neighbors, who I think was named Ted, had it worst. It had taken me a while to find him as he was in his basement at the time. It was dark and fine particles obscured the effects of my phone's flashlight. Still, through my coughing and blinking to get the dust out of my face, I eventually found what was Ted. What Ted is? He had collapsed into a heap of flesh, nothing being able to take root in the concrete floor of the unfinished basement. The flowers that covered him had wilted and shriveled, gangrene and necrotic tissue covering his entire body. He didn't even have a face anymore. His eyes unraveled into white lilacs and his tongue uncoiled into something similar to a grapevine. Every part of it blossomed to try and uselessly grasp at the sunlight that was not there. I think it hurt him to be away from the light more than it hurt the others inside it. I didn't care. I had come down to Ted's basement for another reason, and I had found it. I snatched the gasoline and ran back to my parents' house. It took me a while to thoroughly cover the house with enough for me to be certain, using up the entire can and praying that someone else would come along to help my neighbors. Then, I used my candle lighter to set my childhood home on fire, waiting and making sure that my parents were thoroughly burned. The wind chimes still rang as I heard the willow tree that we never planted behind this house weep. It was as I started to walk away, certain that the house was thoroughly burning, that I tripped over my own foot. When I looked down, I saw that my shoe had been split open, with thin tendrils digging into the grass beneath me. I scrambled to try and get up, ripping the thin strands of nerves out of the ground in excruciating pain. But before I could do anything, I realized my back was now leaching into the ground as well. Every movement I made to try and get up only pulled on my nervous system, shooting pain worse than anything I've ever felt through my body. Even as I coughed up blood and felt my throat expanding, I couldn't do anything but sit there and cry. Blisters have started to appear all over my body, eagerly waiting to pop and embrace the sun. It hurts to breathe. The insides of my lungs have bloomed already and scratch at every breath. My throat is full of roots and petals, so I can't even call for help anymore. I've managed to type this, though. The roots in my hand may have burrowed into my phone, but it has worked long enough for me to do this. I'm glad I could help my parents. I will soon bloom and smell of lavender. I hope someone comes soon. Someone must know. Whether it's the CDC or the government, someone has to prune me, or I will grow into a meadow. My friends and I, quite the adventurous bunch. We thrive on the thrill of a good scare or anything that really gets our adrenaline pumping. There's this local legend that parents often tell their children to keep them from wandering too far. According to the story, the forest is haunted by the spirits of people who lost their lives on that land. Of course, the parents don't go into too much detail because they don't want to terrify their kids completely, but they say just enough to make sure the children know they should never venture into that forest. My friends and I had been planning a camping trip for months, but we never managed to go. Finally, this weekend, we decided to make it happen. And what better place to camp than the supposedly haunted forest? Everyone was on board with the idea, except for Sarah. I don't know, guys. When I think of camping, I imagine relaxing, making s'mores, watching the sunrise, not ghost hunting, Sarah said hesitantly. You can still do that. I'm sure it's just a story. I mean, you don't really believe there's a ghost out in the woods, do you? Mike asked her, trying to reassure her. I don't suppose so, but I'm just saying. I'd rather camp somewhere else, Sarah suggested, but nobody else wanted to change the plan. We packed up in my friend's van and headed out to the forest. We had a good number of people, so we weren't too worried about any potential bears or anything. There was Sarah, Mike, Ben, Chelsea, Katie, and me. We approached the turnoff and pulled onto a dirt path in the woods. The path was extremely narrow, and the leaves from the trees hung so low that they smacked the roof of our van. We parked the van and started unloading our gear. Guys, I really think we need to camp somewhere else. I don't like this, Sarah said, her voice tinged with anxiety. The rest of us couldn't help but laugh and poke fun at her for being so scared over nothing. Oh, come on, Sarah. Don't be such a chicken, Ben said, laughing. It's just a story. We set up camp and tried to enjoy the first night. The air was crisp, and the sky was a blanket of stars. We sat around the fire, roasting marshmallows and telling ghost stories to really set the mood. But as the fire died down and the night grew darker, a strange howling began to echo through the trees. What was that? Sarah asked frantically. It's probably just a wolf off in the distance, Mike answered. I personally didn't think it was a wolf. That wasn't a wolf howl. It was an eerie, mournful howl that sent chills down my spine. Sarah, Katie, and I were in one tent, while Chelsea, Mike, and Ben were in the other. I clutched the pocket knife I had with me. I knew it probably wouldn't do much harm, but it was better than nothing. The girls huddled together in a corner of the tent, their faces pale with fear. The howling continued, and nobody dared to go outside. After what felt like an eternity, the howling ceased. Instead, we could now hear footsteps running around the base of our campsite. I grabbed a flashlight and my knife, bursting out of the tent, ready to confront whoever or whatever was out there. Mike and Ben had come out too. Mike had a pistol and a flashlight, while Ben had just his flashlight. As we stood outside, the footsteps fell silent. We began to search around but found nothing. Carefully, we made our way back to our tents and tried to settle in for the night. I don't think anyone fell asleep. The next morning, we noticed our firewood was running low, so Mike and I decided to venture deeper into the forest to collect more. The forest was dense, and every snap or rustle from the bushes or trees made us jump. We didn't want to admit that we were getting a little spooked. As I chopped at a tree, I lifted my head to check on Mike, and to my surprise, he was gone. I called out for him, but there was no answer. Panic began to rise in my chest as I ran back to get the others. We searched the area for Mike, and when we finally found him, he was standing over a pile of dirty, torn clothes, staring blankly. Okay, whose clothes are these? Sarah asked, visibly shaking. They were probably left by previous campers from years ago, Ben said, trying to reassure us. We all headed back to camp, trying to shake off the unease. The rest of the day was tense, with every shadow and sound making us jump. Nobody wanted to admit they were getting scared, except for Sarah, who reminded us every 5 minutes that she wanted to go home. We tried to keep ourselves busy by cooking a hearty meal, but the fear lingered within us, creating an unsettling silence. That night, as the three of us tried to sleep, I saw a shadow move past the tent. Thinking it was one of the others, I called out, but instead, a hand pressed against the fabric of the tent. The fingers were unnaturally long, and the hand was so bony that I could make out the contours of each joint. I screamed, waking everyone up. We rushed outside, where the others from the second tent joined us. "We need to leave now," I said urgently. "Oh, so now you're scared too?" Ben joked. "I'm not joking. We need to get out of here," I insisted. "Finally, someone is listening to me," Sarah said. We started packing our things and loading them into the van. Ben mumbled under his breath about how we were all scaredy cats and wimps. I didn't care. I had a feeling that the forest had eyes, and we were being hunted as its prey. As we loaded the last few items into the van, the howling and the screaming began. Panic set in, and we all rushed inside the van, but in the chaos, we lost Sarah. We searched frantically around the entire campsite and its surroundings. The howling grew so loud that it vibrated my eardrums, making it hard to think clearly. Despite our desperate efforts, we couldn't search any longer. Sarah was gone. We drove away as fast as we could, but the howling continued to echo in our ears. It felt as if the forest itself was closing in on us, suffocating us with its eerie presence. We finally made it off the dirt path and onto the main road. Without hesitation, we headed straight to the police station to report what had happened and that our friend was lost in the woods. The police, however, were less than sympathetic. They lectured us about the dangers of venturing into the woods without any experience and said that incidents like this were bound to happen. They dismissed our claims about the forest being haunted, assuming we were just a group of teens out in the woods trying to party, and in the chaos, someone got lost. We could tell they didn't take this case too seriously, but they still went out to investigate and search. They called in a search team, and many volunteers showed up to help. The search went on for weeks, combing through every inch of the forest. But to our dismay, Sarah was never found. All they discovered were her clothes, which were torn and buried in the dirt, a haunting reminder of her disappearance. I don't think any of us went camping again after that. Losing Sarah was devastating. She was more than a friend. She was family. The guilt and sorrow weighed heavily on us, a constant burden that we carried every day. All that we had left of her now were memories, vivid and haunting, that would forever remind us of the tragedy that unfolded in those woods. Random question. Has anyone ever been to a poppy field before? Well, if you haven't, no worries, I'll tell you about it. First of all, I live in California, and poppies are everywhere here, as well as being our state flower. Cool, right? Well, I guess it's not that cool. Anyways, poppies are quite abundant here, more so in the mountains. If you ever drive through California during the spring, the mountains look like they're covered in a gold carpet of flowers. Those are the poppies. While they can be found everywhere, there's something special about those golden poppies in the mountains. So special, in fact, the government in California protects that variant of poppies more than the other types. If you so happen to live near the mountains in California, all of this is something you would already know. There's one thing that only people who live in the poppy fields know about, and that is the poppy queen. The poppy queen is an even more special poppy, because there's only one per mountain. The only reason I'm pointing this out is because this flower is something you do not want to get near. The mountain people of California call this flower by a different name. They call it the mountain siren. The name, if you can't tell, is a type of warning. The parents of children that live in the mountain regions tell their kids when playing in the mountains always go in pairs, and if you hear someone calling you, come straight home. The thing is, no matter who you ask, one thing is a constant, and that is if you hear someone calling you, go home. That is all you were ever told to do. They don't give a reason, and they don't tell you why. So me, being the rebel that I am, I decided to do the opposite. I planned to go with a couple of friends just in case. We planned where to go and when we would go. All we told our parents was that we were going hiking, and that's all. The day of the hike, 3 out of the 5 of us bailed out. So it's just me and a guy. One of my friends knows he looks chill, I guess. After talking about which route up the mountain we're going to take, we left. We talked for a while too, to get to know each other better and stuff. It was a long while, but after 3 hours of hiking, we heard it. Someone was calling us up the mountain further. So we followed after the voice. It took us up the mountain a bit, and everything was fine until Mark, the guy that was with me, said we passed the same tree again. We looked at the tree for a minute, not because it was interesting to look at, but rather it felt like we couldn't look away. And then I heard Mark start to whimper. Sam, something is behind me. I feel something behind me, Sam. I can't turn back to look at Mark. My eyes are stuck on this weird tree. I want to look back and to look at him because I can feel the dread in his voice and his words. Sam, I'm scared. I can't see it, but I know it's there. It's okay. Just take a breath. Okay. I can hear his breathing starting to calm down. I tried to look away from the tree to no avail. My eyes are glued to this ugly ashen tree with dagger-like branches. Hey, Mark, are your eyes also stuck looking at this tree? Yeah, mine are too. I don't know why, but I can't look away. I can look away from the tree, but now I understand why he started panicking. I can feel something caressing my back with sharp, jagged nails. My heart is racing and hairs on the back of my neck are on its ends. And then I asked a question that I was terrified to get an answer to. Who are you and why are you messing with us? Mark screamed and then started crying. I heard him fall to his knees, and in his erratic crying, I can hear him say he can't see. After a few seconds, I heard his voice break as he said he can't hear anything now. And then I felt something run up my spine. It felt like fingers, carving its way up from my lower back to my shoulders. And then a whisper into my ear. Would you like to see me? Would you like to look at me? Its voice was a beautiful, raspy voice, but it felt empty. I know it's talking to me, but it feels empty. That's the only way I can explain it. Do you think the boy on the ground would like to see me? By instinct, I replied, no, I don't think he would. Oh, so now you talk back, Sammy. How about we talk some more, Sammy? The way it's saying my name, I know it's grinning while it does it. Sure, I'll talk with you, but can you let my friend go, please? There was a pause for a few minutes. There was a frustrated walking sound behind me, as if it was mad at my response. Fine. Under one condition, Sammy. Okay, I'll do it. What's the condition? You'll have to look at me, that is all. Can you do that, Sammy? The creepy way of saying my name again sends a cold sweat down my spine. Okay, I'll look at you. Good. Now look away from the tree, Sammy, and look at me. Look away from the tree? Wasn't it the one making us look at the tree? I sat quiet for a moment, thinking about what it just said. What are you thinking about, Sammy? Don't you want to protect your friend? Sammy. Sam? Sam. I didn't want to respond to it. Look at me, Sam. Look at me now. Its voice was different now. It was like several different voices yelling at me at once. I'm sorry, Sammy. I didn't mean to yell at you. Can you look at me, please? Now it was back to the voice that I heard originally. I can still hear Mark's low whispering, so he must still be fine. But why? Can it not actually harm us physically if we don't look at it? I know what you were thinking, Sammy. Are you sure you can risk your friend's life with that little conclusion? Can you, Sammy? If not... Why don't you look at me now, Sammy? Turn around now! And then, bang, bang! What in the world was that loud sound? A gunshot? I think it was a gunshot coming from the same direction of the town. Bang, bang, bang. Are you out there? It sounds like the town sheriff, so with every ounce of strength I left in my body, I yelled with everything I had. From the distance, I can hear barking and the footsteps of a dozen or so people. And then it spoke again. This time, its voice was no longer empty. You could feel the anger, rage, and bloodlust in its voice. Just you wait, Sammy. You are mine. And then it went silent. I can feel the ground shaking with the amount of people that came to find me and Mark. When the sheriff grabbed me and turned me around by the shoulders, I realized I can no longer hear anything. Looking around, I could see Mark crying in his father's arms, and then I tried to gesture what had happened to no avail. When we got to the sheriff's department, I wrote down everything that had happened. When I was done, the sheriff just looked at me. Not the kind of look you would give to a crazy person, but the look you would give to someone that you would grieve for. It's been over a decade since then, and I'm now a park ranger for the area that I live in. Obviously, I'm not going to tell you where this has happened for safety's sake. But if you ever visit California and go hiking up in the mountains, 1, go in pairs. 2, tell people your location. 3, bring a map. 4, if you hear someone calling you, just go home. Growing up in a small suburban town, there wasn't much to do. Riding bikes and street hockey between the occasional car on a dead-end street was about as exciting as it got, and if we were lucky, we'd know someone with an above-ground pool in their backyard. For the youngest kids, the only place to play was a small playground in the middle of the playground. It wasn't much, just some swings and a small climbing structure with a slide, the basic minimum effort playground. Next to the playground, there was an old tree on its own. There was nothing particularly special about this tree, but to the kids of the neighborhood, it was significant. This was the toy tree. We called it that because every once in a while, usually after a thunderstorm, there would be toys left under the tree in the morning. I'm not sure how the tradition had started or how long it had been going on, but I know for my whole childhood and for the older kids as well, the toy tree has always been there. When I was around 9 years old, I remember the excitement me and my friends would have every time there was a thunderstorm and waking up at dawn to get there before the other kids to have first dibs on the toys. Sort of like Christmas morning, but in the middle of summer, and the toys were rarely new, but still just exciting. I remember one of these mornings as I ate half a bowl of cereal and then ran down the sidewalk to the playground and saw a couple of the other boys standing around the tree. One of them, a boy named Zach, who is about a year older than me, was holding a Starscream Transformer toy and in the process of turning it into a jet. I overheard his younger brother, Ronnie, whining about how that was his toy and that he wanted it back, and Zach saying that it wasn't his and that he had found it under the toy tree, so it was his. Eventually, Ronnie gave up and ran home, and Zach continued to play with the toy. We all then decided to go ride bikes, and we would go home and then meet back at the park. When we got back, however, Zach wasn't there. We waited for a bit longer and then decided to ride to his house and see what was going on. We knocked on his door and his mom told us he wasn't allowed to come out right now with him screaming and crying in the background, that it wasn't fair. Not sure what it was about, but Zach and Ronnie fought a lot and it really wasn't usual. Not really sure what it was about, but Zach and Ronnie fought a lot, and it really wasn't unusual, so we just left to ride bikes around. The streets were full of fallen branches from the storm the night before, which we found fun to swerve around on our bikes. The next morning, we all meet up at the playground again. There wasn't a storm that night, so we didn't check the tree, but I asked Zach what had happened yesterday, and he told me that his parents took the toy he found and gave it to Ronnie, saying it was his and that Zach had taken it from him. This would continue to happen throughout the summer. After every storm, a toy, or sometimes multiple, would be found under the tree. Transformers, Ninja Turtles, superhero figures, Hot Wheels, and even an RC car one time. We would sometimes fight over them, but we always knew that something else would be there the next time that there was a storm, so we learned to let it go. We learned to let it go. On another one of these mornings, we went to the tree. This time I got there first and found a Megatron toy. It was clearly used and some parts were broken, but it was in nice enough condition and it still transformed. Shortly after I got there, two of the other boys, Jason and Michael, showed up on their bikes. They saw that I had gotten the toy and ran over to see what I had. After I showed it to them, we decided to go see if Zach and Ronnie wanted to come out. We rode to their house, and when we got there, we overheard their father yelling at Zach as he angrily closed a window. Zach was screaming back that he didn't do it, but we weren't sure what he was talking about. When we knocked on the door, their mom told us Zach couldn't come out, but that Ronnie could. And soon after, Ronnie came out and got his bike, and we rode around. Zach had been in trouble a lot recently and was probably why he hadn't been able to come outside much. There was another storm a few weeks later, and I remember being so excited that I couldn't sleep. The rain was so loud, hitting the side of our house, that it sounded like footsteps, and the crack of thunder every few minutes seemed to be getting closer and closer as they rattled the house. Then I hear a very loud crash. It sounded different from the thunder, almost as if it came from inside the house. Curious, I got up and walked to my bedroom door and went into the hallway. I felt a breeze and could hear the rain far more loudly than before. I turned into the bathroom and found where the breeze had been coming from, as the window had been smashed open. I saw a large object on the ground in front of the window, surrounded by the shimmer of broken glass. I tried to turn on the light, but the power had gone out. I took a few steps closer, but cut my foot on the glass. I jumped back and held my foot, but didn't scream, since I didn't want to wake my parents. Assuming they were still asleep, I grabbed a Band-Aid from the bathroom and put it on my foot and shuffled back to my room. The next morning, I walked out of my room and towards the bathroom, careful not to put any pressure on my cut foot. I looked inside and saw my dad knelt down on the floor. I saw the object. It was a large tree branch with a decent amount of blood on the floor. He looked at me, noticing how I was standing, looked down at my foot and saw the Band-Aid. He asked me what happened, and I told him I went to the bathroom last night and cut my foot on the glass. He said that would explain all the blood, and then got up and walked towards me. He sat me down on a chair in the kitchen and took the Band-Aid off my foot. He whipped it off with a disinfectant wipe and then put a new Band-Aid on. Then I rushed to get dressed and went outside to get my bike. I rode down to the playground as fast as I could, and despite my cut foot, I threw my bike down on the grass and ran over to the toy tree. Ronnie was sitting there on the ground under the tree, and Jason and Michael were also standing in front of him. When I got up to them, they said that Ronnie had gotten there first. I asked to see what he had found, and he held up a forearms toy from Ben 10. It was missing one of the hands, which looked like it had been chewed off by a lawnmower. I was confused when I saw it, because I recognized it. It was my toy. Thank you so much for listening to this narration. I hope you enjoyed. A quick thank you to my patrons, Rinku Starr, William Hartley, Cupcake Hips, Alonzo, IC Narrates, and Jesse Hartley. Again, thank you all so much for your support. If you've got any prayer requests, feel free to reach out to me on any social media, and I would love to know how I can be praying for you. And also, about each month, I link a different cause in the description to donate money to, people going through some tough surgeries or funds for victims of natural disasters, etc., etc. If you've got a little extra money to give to someone in need, I've got at least one link for you each month in the description. So that's there for you to do that if you feel that you can. Even if it means that you unsubscribe from my Patreon, that's absolutely wonderful. Much love, and thank you guys again for listening, and I'll see you in the next video.